Welcome to the GSMC Pets Podcast, the show that caters to pet lovers of all kinds. We'll talk about pets on social media, pets doing amazing things, and how to take care of the pets in your life. Whether your pet is a dog, a cat, a llama, hamster, reptile, or something more exotic, you'll find educational and entertaining information on the GSMC Pets Podcast.
Thank you once again for tuning in to the GSMC Pets Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Alex Fletes. Now, if there's one thing I find that's interesting, it's that how animals are able to not only adapt to their environments, but the unique abilities that they have to allow them to thrive in such environments. And that's kind of the topic I feel like discussing today, is animals and their unique abilities and some of the really surprising things that you probably didn't know some animals could do. And of course, there are going to be some I'm sure you heard of, but I still want to take some time to talk about this topic with you guys today. Now, starting off the list, I'm going to start off with something a little simple. I'm sure a lot of people know this, but a lot of animals, mainly nocturnal animals that have high hunting prowess, from the owl to, well, even your common house cat, have this really cool ability, the night vision ability. Night vision is honestly a really cool ability, and the way that it works is pretty fascinating as well. So if you've ever, say, been walking down the road and, maybe you have a pet cat, and as you're walking, you just kind of happen to see something glowing in the distance, two little eyes staring back at you. That's that really awesome night vision ability. And it's not like it's a turn on, turn off sort of deal, like, you get a pair of military grade night vision goggles and then you just turn on due to special lights and cameras. But rather with these type of animals, it does something a little bit different by using reflections and natural light. So while I'm not 100% on all the biological terminology here, I do know the base of this really cool ability is that there's sort of like, as I've been described, sort of like special sort of reflective material in the back of the irises of these animals. And what they do is they take the natural light, so in this, let's just say in the wild, a natural predator, like maybe a jaguar or something that hunts pretty well at night, will have a reflection of usually the moon's light to help them see better in the dark. And it's really fascinating to know that that kind of built-in ability is given to these creatures. And we as people have adapted to that sort of ability as well with our own man-made versions. However, having that natural innate ability is really fascinating. As people, we do have the ability to see in the dark to an extent if it's natural, but we never will have that same level of night vision as these animals can. And it's really fascinating to see that happen. So just imagine you're out and you see well in the daytime, but then the second night comes around, it's like, ooh, it's almost like it's day to me. It's really cool. It really is a really cool ability. And there are a lot of animals that can use this, but there are other abilities who use very similar abilities as well. I'm sure some of you have heard of the term echolocation. So I actually did talk about this in my last podcast about how some animals use echolocation to determine where their prey is or determine where certain things are. And it's kind of a really, compared to night vision, it's more of a technical ability that's a little trickier to explain, but I'll try. So I believe dolphins and bats use some of these, but I'm going to focus on dolphins right now because if I remember correctly, they sort of make a clicking noise, like a kind of like a clicking, chirpy noise and as they're underwater, the noise they gives off sort of spreads out, and then it bounces off of other things. So if you were in a wide open area, let's just say you're in a large room that has nothing in it aside from like one chair, and you had this echolocation ability, you'd make a noise, and then all of the sound would sort of spread out around you, and then when you hear it hit something, it would let you know, oh, there's something in that direction. It's difficult unless you're able to actually exercise this ability, which is why it's so cool too, because we as people wouldn't be able to comprehend this ability without visual aid. But this is made so that way people who don't have that visual aid can see it. It really is amazing. But we as people have sort of used some of this to our advantage to really, I guess, sort of adapt that for larger scale use. After all, we do have things like sonar and radar, which do roughly the same exact thing. But that's because we have a visual aid to show us. We don't use a natural echolocation or a sonar or a radar to sort of feel or hear things. Sure, occasionally we may use, say, an echo if we're in a big open cave to sort of like say, oh, I guess this is a lot bigger than I expected, or wow, this room's a lot wider. But it's not something we quite often think about. And it's pretty fascinating to see these kind of creatures do this sort of thing. I've never personally gotten to see or hear echolocation being used by dolphins, since where I am, we don't really have the capacity for dolphins. But one day I am determined to get to see, or rather experience, this ability firsthand. Along with that, the night vision ability that I've already explained is a much more common ability, but I feel like it's very underlooked, especially for you cat owners. I think you understand this ability, but you don't quite grasp the real amazingness of this ability. And that's, you don't have to worry about things like your cat being lost. Your cat knows where it is, especially at night. It can see its trouble. It's really good because night is honestly one of the roughest times for any creature, mammal, aquatic, or not, because if you don't have this ability, you're pretty much a sitting duck. You are leaving yourself open and vulnerable to anything and everything that could hurt you, whereas creatures that have this ability can immediately pick up where they left off. If they decide to take a nap, if they get started up by something, they are immediately back up and running. They can see what's coming at them. It's a really cool ability that, honestly, if I had one of these abilities, night vision would probably be like in the top 3, but I don't think it's going to be my top ability. But it is still fascinating. Along with that, echolocation is definitely a really cool one. Echolocation, having the ability to see, I actually do think that there are humans who can actually use this ability too. If I'm correct, there are people who can't see who will actually make a clicking or some kind of chirp noise with their mouth, a trick they picked up. So while they're walking, they can actually sense where something is. I think that is actually, there are some cases of that happening. If I remember very frequently, there was a movie, I think called The Book of Eli, where the main character, played by Denzel Washington, actually did use this ability to an extent. It was a small underlying, like, something kind of there that you didn't really notice, but it did give you hints about the character, which was really cool. So it is possible, and a lot of times people do mimic animals, and there are probably several other examples of this happening that I definitely want to bring up to light in the upcoming hour of this podcast. But with that being said, just kind of think about any other abilities, and as we continue on today, definitely feel free to leave a comment through the rest of this episode if you have any abilities you think that should be mentioned. I'm going to be bringing that up, and I'm also going to relate these back to man abilities and things that we as people have definitely borrowed from animals in our lifetime. Because if we can't learn from animals, then what are we doing? There are several instances of people learning and adapting from animals and vice versa, and that's honestly one of the best mentalities to have when it comes to nature is to not simply just take from it, but to learn from it. If we're taking anything, we should definitely take some knowledge from nature so that way we can better ourselves without fully impacting the delicate ecosystem that is our environment. But with that being said, we're going to take a short break, so you guys are going to hear a word from these messages, and I'm going to go and practice my echolocation. But until then, please enjoy. We'll be right back.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Back. Thanks for tuning in. So we're talking about the special abilities of animals today and how fascinating they are and what we learn from them as well. So we just talked about night vision and a little bit on echolocation, two really awesome abilities. But now let's step it up just a notch with another really great ability today. We're talking about mimicry. So mimicry is just like it sounds. The ability to mimic other things in your surroundings, and even sounds and straight up colors and appearances. So there are a few animals that can do things like this. One of the sort of lesser examples would be something like a chameleon that I've talked a little bit about already, but a chameleon has the ability to change its colors to blend into its surrounding. But that falls more into the line of camouflage. Now, camouflage is a type of mimicry, but the chameleon only is really able to change its colors based on certain things. In fact, a chameleon might change its color to, say, a bright red or even a blue, not really to match in with backgrounds most of the time, but also to sort of deter predators. So if you remember from a few podcasts ago with my exotic animal episode, animals, specifically reptiles or amphibians that have a lot more brighter colors like reds, blues, really bright colors, are usually a fair warning to any of their predators that they shouldn't eat those because they're usually very poisonous. But in this case, a chameleon does sort of that to both show, hey, look at me. See these colors? You see these colors? Yeah, don't eat me. Don't eat me. I might be poisonous. I might be kind of poisonous here. You probably shouldn't eat me. Along with that, it also can show its potential mood or potential that it's in danger. So it's sort of a multi-layered ability. But there are animals who actually do mimic very well. So since we're still on the topic of sort of amphibians and reptiles, let's talk about the two aquatic creatures that really take use of mimicry. And I'm talking about the physical mimicry of octopi and cuttlefish. So these guys are some crazy mimics. And if you know anything about me, I'm a huge nerd, and D&D is definitely something I'm fascinating in. And as you always know, if the table laughs, if the chest has teeth, you kill it because it's a mimic. Okay, but enough of that. So with octopi and especially cuttlefish, they have really, really cool abilities. So they are more gelatinous creatures, meaning they have, I believe they're invertebrates, so they don't have any bones. Obviously they don't. If you've seen any of those kooky videos of octopi escaping, they can kind of squeeze through really tight spaces because they have no bones. So they're basically like water and jelly inside of their bodies. So they find a small crack, they will slip right through it. But what's really cool is the ability to move their body and change their body shape. So octopi actually have color changing abilities as well. So maybe they're swimming on the surface and a bigger predator might come around and looking for some food. All an octopi has to do is to find a nice spot, maybe like some rough sand or maybe even among rocks, and will simply just kind of shimmy its way into the sand and will change its color. Usually going from maybe it could be a reddish color or a gray color, and it just kind of changes to like a bright white or a sandy color. It can change its body to match the surroundings of the sea floor typically, or even things like rocks. Now, with that, a cuttlefish does that and then some. While octopi can do this to an extent, typically a cuttlefish does something really cool, and this is really, really awesome. I've seen it done. It's crazy. So, cuttlefish kind of look like octopi and squids. They're interesting creatures, but what these things do are, while they also can change their color, they also change their body shape. So I've really seen this really amazing video of a cuttlefish that was trying to hide from some predators, and it actually, I believe, buried itself near some rocks, and then actually went from a smooth texture, and it turned itself into a lumpy texture, and it looked just like a rock. And if you weren't watching the video, from beginning to end, you wouldn't have been able to tell where this cuttlefish was, and it was amazing. It's something really fascinating that that animals like this can do. And that also kind of makes me want to talk about another topic that I'll get into in a little bit. Because along with mimicry, we also have, on the opposite end, we've been talking about animals that live in the water, but what about animals that live in the air? Birds have really fun mimicry because, unlike fish that really don't make any noise, birds make all the noise. And especially with the lyrebird not only is able to do really, really cool things, stylistically with its body, it also has a really unique ability to imitate over 20 different bird species. It can imitate the cries of over 20 different bird species. And it also knows how to imitate man-made sounds, car alarms, and even chainsaws on some occasions. That is a really impressive form of mimicry, because while in the pursuit of trying to find a mate, the lyrebird can imitate other bird-type species, it can also apparently imitate human noises within its range. That's pretty impressive. Of course, my personal favorite bird, the crow, or the corvid genus of birds, are not only known for sort of mimicking sounds, they can actually mimic some human speech. Along with that, they kind of imitate some human behaviors as well. But it's not a survival thing. It's more of, hey, we can do this and we're going to mess around with you. And that's why I do love those birds. But that does make me want to talk a little bit about human mimicry and how humans have mimicked animals in the form of mimicry. So while birds and fish and other animals have taken a thing or two from humans, humans have also taken something from them in the process. So if you've ever known me, one thing you should know is that I also do love things that probably don't have any relevance, but a lot of history and interesting factoids. I love a lot of Japanese culture, and the culture of the ninjas have always been fascinating to me because of their ingenuity and how a lot of ninjas were basically farmers who were tired of being taxed by the rich and powerful imperialists and decided to do something about it. It's fascinating. But one thing I did find interesting is that they actually did borrow a lot of things from animals to survive more in the wild. One of my favorite things is actually how, just like how animals mimicked their surroundings, humans also learned to mimic their surroundings, specifically with different techniques, and very subtle techniques as well. One example is that if in pursuit of chase, all sometimes a ninja would do was simply curl up into a ball near a rock or something, and they blend in. or they just would blend in by simple movements. I believe a lot of this was actually imitating the ostrich and the ostrich's weird habit of putting their face low to the ground to avoid predators. It was interesting. Along with that, one thing I find very interesting about what they took was from creatures that climbed up in trees very often, like raccoons and possums. And fun fact, raccoons in Japan are called tanuki. So the tanuki no gakure, or the art of the raccoon, would be where ninjas would actually climb up into high places because humans didn't tend to look up higher than their line of vision. So they could usually hide from people by being about a good 2 or 3 feet higher than them, and they would never really notice. So by sort of understanding and following how animals function, they actually were able to become more efficient warriors in the field. And warriors are a pretty loose term as well. But it's kind of cool how we're able to give that kind of back and forth from animals and vice versa. It's always amazing knowing what we can take from animals, but also what they can take from us, specifically how well they can imitate us just to mess with us. But with that being said, it's time for another break, so please enjoy these messages as we continue on with more of our amazing animal abilities and some of the cool things you might not have known, and maybe what you can give back or what might come from us to them and stuff. So definitely stay tuned as we continue. Please enjoy.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Just like that, we are back again. Thanks for tuning in, folks. So we have been talking about amazing animals and their amazing, unique abilities that you probably don't know about or just really haven't put much thought into, but that's what I'm here for. So what's probably one of the most creepy, kooky, probably unfathomable abilities that an animal could have? Night vision? No. Being able to hear enemies or prey or predators from miles away with just sounds and echo radar? No. How about regrowing limbs or pretty much restarting your whole life? Yeah, that's a pretty good one. So there are a lot of animals, quite commonly invertebrates, that have this really crazy ability to essentially restart everything about them or to take care of any major injuries. Now, some animals do have incredible ways to heal or have ways to actually essentially take care of themselves whenever they need to. But a lot of these have really weird abilities or just really impressive ones. Now, here's a pretty easy one for you. Lizards. Lizards, primarily, normal lizards and I think some geckos, have the ability to discard their tails. Unfortunately, it's not always useful because for some lizards, they only can use this once. And then the rest of their tail will maybe grow back partially. But it's a really good escape tactic. So let me paint you a picture from the human perspective. You have a very large backpack filled with important items you need, maybe medical supply or maybe some food, and you're being chased by a large predator, whatever you want. In the process, the predator manages to grab you by the backpack, and you want to survive. So in the process, you quickly rip off your backpack and then just start running while the predator's munching at the backpack. It's essentially like that. Or if you want to get more macabre. If you want to get more gross, let's just say instead you have a leg, and same thing happens, and you're able to quickly detach your leg and run away somehow. Essentially like that. So a lot of lizards do have this ability. A good bit of them can grow their tails back, but not all of them. But it's a very useful one-time use ability if you are in danger. Now, what about growing them back? Well, there are still a fair amount that actually do that. But besides just growing them back, there are some interesting other mammals that have some abilities like this too. The spiny mouse has a very interesting ability that it can actually discard chunks of its own skin and to release itself from a predator's clutches, and then also apparently regrow some of it back too. It's a little bit of a grody ability, but it is a cool ability nonetheless for a mammal to have that. So while lizards may have the ability to, say, lose a tail and grow it back, for a mammal to have that, like the spiny mouse, is definitely a rare and unique ability. But now, what about animals that can fully regrow parts of their bodies? Well, we're going to have to take another trip down into the water to meet, well, your favorite Hawaiian shorts wearing celestial being shaped creature, the starfish. Now, while it doesn't wear shorts, it really doesn't need to, because it has the amazing ability to, if a part of it grows back, it can simply regrow it. If in some freak case, maybe it's attacked by a natural predator like a seagull, and a piece of it gets eaten and it manages to get away, a starfish can grow back parts of its body. This is actually really fascinating too, because apparently if its, quote, brain is, messed up, it can regrow it. It's really, honestly, an amazing ability that it really goes unnoticed because people find starfish to be unremarkable. Starfish are very interesting creatures. They don't do a lot, but they are capable of a lot of really impressive things. And the question is, can they do these things because they are simple creatures? Or is it because maybe there's more going on than we realize? But that does bring me up to the next and probably the most impressive of these amazing abilities, and that's gotta be jellyfish. Specifically the scarlet jellyfish. Now, jellyfish may not seem like very complex creatures, but they have a lot going on inside of them that we just don't realize. And that's mainly in the fact that a scarlet jellyfish has a really crazy ability to not simply just regrow limbs, but rather to restart its life. And what I mean by that is, if a scarlet jellyfish has some major injury to it, tentacles lost, perhaps it was injured by a predator that is capable of eating jellyfish, because there are predators that can eat jellyfish. I think the sea turtle is one of them. Then the jellyfish, specifically the scarlet jellyfish, can actually return back to the ocean floor and turn itself back into a polyp, which is basically a juvenile form of a jellyfish, and then it spends a couple months regrowing back into its normal state. And apparently this isn't a one-time thing either. Apparently there have been witness reports by scientists saying that this cycle has been done over 12 times. So that is very impressive in any type of biological creature. Plants have that's their standard thing, is regrowth. A plant's injured, if you can take a certain piece of it, put it back in the ground, it'll grow back. It'll do it. It'll just grow back again. It's really amazing how resilient plants are. But to have something that is a natural biological creature, a living, breathing, or rather a living, pulsating creature, to be able to restart its life cycle and continue living as though it was good as new, is really, really amazing. And I believe there's constantly those ads saying that we can use this new protein found in jellyfish to help with mental disorders or to help with cell loss and stuff like that. So that is a pretty fascinating thing that we can take from animals, but do we take too much from it? It is important to study these kind of topics because it can benefit humans. However, in the process, we shouldn't take more than we need. If SpongeBob's taught us anything, it's that we can't take from creatures just because they provide us some very delicious jellyfish jelly, or in this case, some very proficient proteins, but rather we should be able to study and somehow learn to coexist with these animals that can benefit us and benefit them. We just have to make sure we can get to that place in due time. But between vertebrates that are able to discard pieces of their body and somehow grow them back, to invertebrates that can regrow their brains, to completely gelatinous forms that can restart their whole life if they're having a bad day, well, that's just pretty amazing, to be honest. Now, would I say that's probably in my top 3 abilities? Nah, because, I personally would like to just make sure I have some kind of advantage, but not like the greatest advantage, because it's kind of an easy way out for me. But then again, I'm not a jellyfish living in the ocean, so I don't have to worry about that. But I will worry about what my next choice will be very soon. But you guys should stay tuned for that. But I hope you guys are enjoying this. And if you have any comments or have any abilities you think are amazing, please leave them in the comments of the video, because that definitely does help us out and does help me find more topics to talk about for you guys, because I know what you want to hear. But I really hope you're enjoying this. As well, I think we're going to probably go back to the vertebrae very soon and talk about some animals that have more aesthetically pleasing abilities, but still are pretty awesome abilities nonetheless. I hope you guys enjoy. Now, we're going to be taking a short break in just a moment, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about some more animals and their unique shifting of appearances, but in a different way you're not quite sure you can agree with or not. But we'll stay tuned and just listen in just a minute. So until then, enjoy these messages, and we'll be right back.
Is weird, odd, strange, or just plain bizarre is really your cup of tea? Then, the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast will give you that fix. Can't believe it? Well, listen for yourself as we deliver the strangest news you definitely won't find on CNN or Fox. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast.
At it again. So we've been talking about interesting animals with very interesting abilities, and we've talked a good bit about some of the interesting internal abilities and some physical abilities, but let's talk about some of the weird things some of these animals can do with their bodies. Now, warning, this might get a little creepy and kooky, but not any worse than it really has been. But just to let you know, we might be talking about some of them creepy crawlies. But that's okay, because we have a lot of other cool ones to go around as well. Let's start kind of light with pygmy jerboas. These guys, they look like rodents. They're very interesting, but they have almost kangaroo-like legs. These are small little mice, and they have kangaroo-like legs. They have about... Ooh, wow. This is pretty interesting. So their body length is about 2 to 3 inches. That's barely the size of your hand. And they can jump about 9 feet in one hop. These little itty-bitty things can jump about 9 feet. They are really fascinating, and they are just honestly a sight to behold if you look at them. This is definitely one of those unusual abilities. You know, kangaroos have the ability to hop, but, you know, it's not that unremarkable considering their size, but these little things have such a hop. It's fascinating. Along with that, we also have some pretty interesting ones too that go a little more with your bodies, such as Tasmanian devils, which actually have the ability to make loud screeching noises and offensive odors when it's stressed. So there are only a couple of mammals that'll do this, but sort of becoming completely unpleasant just to get people to stay away from you is pretty interesting. And we have talked a little bit about Tasmanian devils in a past episode. But having the ability to make loud screeching doesn't seem that impressive, but when it emits a very offensive odor because it's stressed out, that's kind of an interesting one. Now, skunks have a very similar ability to this because of their stink sacs. They're able to actually spray with intent to offend, but having the ability to secrete a very obnoxious smell due to stress is kind of a different but interesting ability. I know that humans have a similar ability, but I think that having sort of this internal defense that can probably deter most predators just simply due to being uncomfortable is kind of interesting in my opinion. Now, I will talk about one of our more creepy ones right now. So we have honeypot ants. Honeypot ants are really weird because, well, these guys, they're ants that are fed by worker ants until they're so engorged with food that their abdomens will actually swell really huge. I'm looking at this picture right now, and if you looked at it, it's kind of like if you ever seen one of those goofy pictures of a big brain, and it's like a person with a normal body but an extra large brain, almost the size of their body. It kind of looks like that. And then basically the ants can hold on to these food and then use it as nutrients. So in the events that they run out of food, they'll actually be able to like sort of take that food back in. So it's kind of like their camels, how they're able to hold on to their nutrients. It's really interesting. Since we're still on the topic of creepy crawlies, we have the assassin spider. So this is a really rare one because while most spiders actually have, you know, they are kind of cold killers in themselves, ability to sneak around and capture bugs, the assassin spider is actually different because it actually hunts other arachnids, and this spider grows to about almost an inch long, so 0.8 inches. So an inch is pretty big for a spider. Very big, honestly. And having the ability to have venom that'll actually be able to affect other spiders is pretty special in itself as well. So there are some other type of animals out there that hunt somewhat in its own species or have the ability to take down something bigger than itself, but having a very lanky spider that actually is able to match in size and then have venom that affects it is really unique in itself. But there is one I've been really excited to talk about, two actually. So the chameleon. We have talked about the chameleon earlier, and we talked about the chameleon in a previous episode, but I want to spend some time on this. So having night vision is honestly a really cool ability, but with chameleons, they have 360-degree vision. So yes, chameleons can walk on walls, change colors, do a lot of really, really cool things. But the 360-degree angle is really cool. Now, if I personally wanted an ability, being able to see behind myself is definitely one of them. Although I don't think I would want eyes in the back of my head, or I would want my eyes to be able to move around, but having that ability is still cool. And because of the chameleon's more flat-shaped head and having eyes that can move around, it really is fascinating. Now, not all species of chameleon have the camouflage, but being able to have camouflage and then essentially being able to watch your own back and see in any direction you need is really impressive. Humans can see most directions except, their direct back, but chameleons have that really unique ability. And I think that would be one of my top 5 abilities right there, simply because getting to see where you need to be or what's around you, getting to have more observation of your skills is pretty fantastic. So, adding on to interesting physiology, there's a hairy frog, and it's called the hairy frog or the horror frog because it actually has, hairs, and rather it's called the hairy frog because it looks like it has hair on it. But it actually, this is kind of creepy here. When it's threatened, it'll actually break bones in its toes and forces sharp bones through the skin to be used as claws. It's called the hairy frog because it kind of resembles hair because of its bones. But that is honestly frightening. But if not, it's a pretty cool ability. Essentially having built-in claws, although it might hurt like heck. But then again, frogs are pretty, not gelatinous, but they have a more soft body tissue, so it might be easier for them to manage. But that's a pretty Wolverine ability right there, and I think that's pretty awesome. Which also, fun fact, I'm sure if you've watched any of the movies you might know this, but Wolverine, the comic book character, his claws are actually not made of metal. They're actually bone claws that are reinforced with a metal coating. So essentially take that ability that the hairy frog has and then put metal around his body and around his skeleton, and you have a frog Wolverine. So yeah, that's kind of awesome. There are some pretty other really amazing abilities as well. I think this one's actually definitely a really creepy one, but since we're on this area, we might as well talk about it. The trapdoor spider, a very fascinating spider that, well, at the end of its abdomen, this is more interesting. So at the end of the what people would look at as the butt of the spider, it's sort of oddly cut off, but in replace it has a more hardened disc on its back, which makes it look more solid, almost like a rock, or in some cases, it actually looks like a doorknob. So this is an interesting ability because it's actually like a neat reinforcement on its back area that I've never seen something like that before because, how often are you going to get close to a trapdoor spider? It's pretty freaky. But one last one I really want to talk about in this segment today has to be one of the coolest things ever, the ballast lizard. The ballast lizard, or as some people call it, the Jesus Christ lizard, is really amazing because instead of actually swimming, the lizard's long floppy feet and front claws actually allow it, in its weird motion, to actually run on the water. Now, it's a weird type of swimming, but it is swimming due to its height, its weight, its built, and then it just sort of runs and flops in the water. And if you ever take the time on YouTube to go look up any animal, go look up a ballast lizard and watch it run on water. It is amazing. It's one of the coolest abilities and definitely an awesome ability I wish I have. It's got to be right there, my top 3 right there. So it's an amazing ability. It's a really impressive lizard. It's one of the few I've ever seen be able to do this. There are a couple other animals that can do stuff like that, which I'll definitely talk about in the next section. But for right now, we're going to take another quick break to hear some words from our messages and sponsors and whatnot. But until then, I hope you guys can think of some other really cool animals to talk about in the description, in the comments, and tell me what you guys think. But until then, stay tuned.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
We weren't gone for too long, but we are back and here to talk about more animals with unique abilities. Now, one ability that I really want to highlight from our previous section is the ability to walk on water, which is a really cool ability which doesn't get used very frequently except in very rare circumstances for very, very specific types of animals. Now, I mentioned the ballast lizard last time, which is, again, the Jesus Christ lizard. Very awesome because it runs on water. It sort of runs and kind of flops around like a little dope, but it's really adorable to watch. And the way that it's doing this is actually the way that its hind legs are running. It's actually catching little air pockets to step into, which is really, really cool. It's pretty fascinating. If you've never seen it happen, it's definitely something worth watching. On top of that, we have other lizards that actually do something very similar where they sort of gasp onto little bits of water. And of course, we have some pretty easy ones as well. We have, for example, the water striders, which are just simple bugs, which the way that they're designed is actually pretty cool. Water striders actually sort of, they have very narrow legs, and they use these legs to sort of also grasp onto little air pockets and sort of just float and stride on water. So if you ever see them, they actually do resemble those long-legged sort of canoes or kayaks that you might see in more indigenous cultures, where it's a boat, but it has longer ballasts on the end to keep the boat level. So in heavier or harsher water conditions, they can hit the waves, or they can sort of hit the environments a lot more effortlessly, which is pretty awesome, honestly. Also, a really fun fact, I'm going to take just a moment to talk a little bit more about culture. Like I've said, I really, really enjoy ninja culture, Japanese culture, and the history of ninjas and shinobi. And on top of this, this is all very reminiscent of a myth that ninjas were able to walk on water. This is a myth. It's not exactly fully proven that ninjas had this ability, but what is proven is that they did have tools to sort of assist with the process of moving through water. But a lot of times they believe that ninjas had special shoes, which sort of resembled like a long sort of flat hula hoop sort of thing, and it was believed that these shoes could grasp the air pockets as it moved across the water and allowed for ninjas to sort of shuffle across the water very slowly or effortlessly. Unfortunately, this seems like it's mainly just a big rumor, or as far as I know, it's not been 100% proven. But what is proven is that a lot of these animals have that ability, and hopefully we can actually use this knowledge to possibly further our research on human buoyancy. For example, fishing spiders, which, believe it or not, are ridiculously impressive because they are indeed fishing spiders. These spiders use the exact same methods to be able to stay on the water as the strider or most of these other creatures, where they skim across the water due to small air pockets, and when they detect ripples in the water, they actually will use their webs to catch creatures like fish in the water. So they will actually throw nets into the water to catch fish, and it's ridiculous. And they'll more likely drag it onto the land and do their thing from there. So, grody, but very impressive. It's really crazy. And they'll actually even, go underwater, too, to help catch the prey. It's honestly crazy. But going from more of the creepy crawlies to more of the, fun and happy and chipper fellows, dolphins. Dolphins can kind of walk on water. They are mammals, so technically they're not fish, so, they can't stay in the water. But they live their entire life in the water, just they don't breathe water. It's interesting. What's really interesting is that dolphins do, in a sense, walk on water. If you've ever seen dolphins do that really fun sort of backwards scooting tail motion, that is really cool. It's sort of the way their tails are made allow them to sort of keep afloat on top of the water as they keep scooting. And they do it really fast, too. Now, people will wonder what's the tactical advantage for having this skill. Does it help them evade predators or do anything? Honestly, no. This skill is literally just for fun. Dolphins might do this just because they want to show off, or maybe because they've been trained by humans to do this, but to be completely honest, they just do this for fun. There is no benefit. It's literally the same reason why humans might whistle or snap their fingers. They do it for fun and because they can. And if anything, why not have an ability that you can do just because you can? I mean, if you can think back to any abilities you might have, how many times have your friends done something like your double-jointed friend has moved their wrist a weird way or put their arm behind their back or something? Or maybe you have a friend who's capable of doing a backflip. While it is an impressive feat, it doesn't necessarily help in everyday life. Now, if they do acrobatic stuff for a living, or perhaps they pursue more acrobatics, yes, then that is a valuable skill. But in all reality, it's not a useful skill on a regular day-to-day living. And that's literally what the dolphins are here. They're like, hey, dude, check this out. Just skating on the water and stuff, and it's honestly pretty funny. And I love the fact that dolphins are just so unconcerned with anything that they can just pick up a trick like this and do just that. And one of the last creatures I really will talk about is actually a bird. And it's kind of interesting because there are birds that can actually run on water. You know, you may think ducks or geese have the ability to walk on water, and they kind of do, but they don't actually walk on the water. There are some geese that will sort of flap their wings and flutter across the water to, maybe like to get some attention or to scare away something. But in all honesty, they will only take a few steps. But the storm petrel is actually very more interesting because it's actually a smaller bird, about the size, maybe a little bit bigger than a robin, so very small bird. And it's not really walking, but rather it's hovering very close. So it's actually fluttering its wings, and it's floating right above the water, touching it very frequently, and giving the appearance that it's Naruto running across the water. But honestly, it's pretty interesting though, because their legs are actually too weak to support it for more than a few steps, meaning it looks like it's walking, but it's really not. And actually, it has to move around this way, because if it tried walking or tried doing a lot of distances, they'd probably drown pretty quickly. But the ability to imitate the look of walking on water, that's some David Copperfield / Chris Angel level of manipulation there, and I like it. So rather than actually having the ability, but making people believe you have the ability is just as good too, especially if it's a way to get around. So that's pretty fascinating, and I honestly would have to say, if we were talking about unique abilities, if we were talking about just any animal ability, I'd have to say having the ability to fly would definitely be on my list. But for unique abilities that's really limited, having the ability to walk on water is definitely one of the coolest abilities. Just to imitate it, to look like I'm walking on water, would be really, really fascinating to have. And it's definitely one of my favorite abilities to see that animals have as well. I definitely think that animals have so much unique potential and so many things that we could actually learn from them. I don't know how often we do take into these considerations what we can learn from them, but this is a good time to really look upon that and see what we as people can grasp from animals. And in just a bit, we're going to go on a break. And when we do go on break, I do encourage you all to think of any other animal suggestions you might want covered in the future, any abilities or any unique animals that don't get enough spotlight. I already have a few in my head that I'm going to talk about very soon that I'm sure you guys will enjoy. And as always, make sure you keep learning, keep trying to pull something from these opportunities to learn, because it's my job to teach and educate. That's what I pride myself on doing. But regardless, we'll be taking a quick break, and as we continue forward, we're going to be talking more about some different type of animal abilities, if we can call them that, and just where their inspiration comes from, and why I feel it's important to know about these. It's going to be an extra special surprise, so stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Congratulations, you've made it back, and we have so much more to talk about in this last section, but I'm so glad you're here today. So, as I've stated several times already, I'm a huge nerd, okay? And one of my favorite series is Pokemon. And if I can work in any of my nerd love into the series, I will. And I felt like this was a really good option to really get to talk about some things that you don't realize how often or how frequent real life and nature can affect or influence media, television, and video games and other things we take in. So, if you've never played a Pokemon game, which is understandable, a lot of people haven't, but it is one of the biggest franchises out there. People have put it under scrutiny as glorifying animal cruelty, which, if you were looking at it from the surface, could be the case, but I want to shine some light on how in-depth the series really is. Specifically, what they decided to do with the Pokemon and their abilities, because Pokemon have innate abilities. Some are very simple abilities, some are more complex or derived from the actual biology or real-world relation of them. For example, one really effective ability called Aroma Veil, which protects your allies from moves that limit their choices. Basically, this is a move that, due to the sense the Pokemon's able to give off, can protect them from certain moves that would give them limitations, like you can't use this move. Well, guess what? By distracting your opponent, you've actually taken away that specific ability. There are other ones as well, such as Battle Armor or Big Pecs would actually help you boost your defenses. Battle Armor specifically, it protects your Pokemon from critical hits. So if you think to, for example, armadillos, or even I believe it is the badger. The badger is very interesting because it has a lot more thick hide on its back, so what might be considered a weak spot, like the back of the neck, is actually a very tough spot to deal damage to a badger. Same thing with armadillo, it has thicker armors. And then we have some other really, really cool abilities as well. We've already talked about chameleons very frequently, but one more time. There's actually a Pokemon whose exclusive ability, meaning only this Pokemon will know it, is Color Change, which actually changes the Pokemon's type depending on the foe's move. So, if, for example, the foe used a Fire-type move, the Pokemon would change to a Fire-type as well, which is an excellent representation of a chameleon changing its color spots to sort of change its appearance based on location or situation. For example, a chameleon might change its color to a dark green or brown to blend in to avoid its enemies, but then it might also change its color to a bright red or blue to confuse its enemies to make it believe that it's actually poisonous, like we've already mentioned before. So that's actually a really good example of that. Let's see. On top of that, there are several other ones. Compound Eyes is a really fun ability that mainly a lot of bug-type Pokemon know, and it actually boosts the accuracy. And if you've ever seen Compound Bug Eyes, for example, on a butterfly or maybe even bees, their big round bug eyes have little sort of hexagon patterns on them that let them see in more directions at once, which is actually very it's a very representative ability as it boosts the Pokemon's accuracy. Very, very useful ability, honestly, when you think about it. On top of that, there are several other more obscure or sort of like tough to comprehend abilities. Like, for example, there are abilities like rough skin, or even abilities like drizzle, which you think, what benefit is drizzle when it makes it rain when you enter the battlefield? Well, this is actually beneficial because there are animals that do benefit from being in a more rainy environment. A lot of times, specific water types that are based off of, say, toads or more semi-aquatic creatures will benefit from being in the water because, sometimes they need to hurry up and escape into a liquid environment, or it causes your opponent to misstep involving its area. Along with that, there are several others. One of my personal favorite abilities is emergency exit. So when your Pokemon's HP reaches about 50%, you immediately get out of there. They switch out or they leave, and it's really great because there are Pokemon, or rather there are animals and Pokemon that are more likely to flee from a battle than actually try to fight. There are animals that will actually try putting on a tough front, make themselves look bigger, but will actually use cheap tactics to run away because they're not trying to fight and win. They're trying to survive, which is definitely a very, very useful ability to have. On top of that, there are several other abilities as well. Let's see. How about... there's some pretty simple ones as well. We've already talked about how badgers have more of a intimidating ability, which is also a very, very simple... it's a very simple but very effective Pokemon ability called Intimidate, which basically, if you use Intimidate, the second your Pokemon goes into battle, it intimidates the other Pokemon and cuts their attack in half. Very useful ability, especially if it's, say, a much bigger target intimidating a smaller target. Or, for example, if you walk in the wild and you run into a tiger or a lion, pretty sure it's going to use Intimidate on you. So it's definitely a relatable ability and very useful. On top of that, there are even other abilities as well. There's simple ones like Levitate, which give your Pokemon immunity to ground-type moves, but that's pretty obvious. Animals that are on the ground will be affected by things on the ground. Animals that fly are not affected by things on the ground. It's really interesting on how well these actually do relate back to real-world animals and can actually really be interpreted by how well they're used. Personally, one we've just been talking about all day, mimicry. There's a ability called Mimicry, which changes a Pokemon's type based on the terrain, which we've been talking about a lot today, is how animals can mimic what's around them, what's happening, and will be really beneficial if you know what you're doing. These are really fascinating moves and fascinating creatures that have actually gotten a lot of influence and a lot of influence from real life very frequently. There are a lot of other things that some of these creatures do, or a lot of other very, very like one-to-one representation, not only in their abilities but also in their appearance or where they come from, and it's very, very fascinating. Even Pokemon that would be like almost mystical have a lot of real world influence. I think one of my favorites is also moves like Paralyze or like Static or Poison Touch, where if you touch something you might poison something, which is real life to a real life poison dart frog, and obviously only poison type Pokemon will learn that. And there are several other games, movies, media, television that definitely borrow a lot of inspiration from real life. And I definitely might want to spend a little more time in the future maybe highlighting some other feats from Pokemon and just showing you how fascinating and almost zoological this game can be. It's really fascinating. It's become one of my personal favorite hobbies to be able to relate real life to this game. and to others as well, because as much as I have a passion for animals, I have a passion for games, I have a passion for media, and getting to blend the two together really does add a level of enjoyment to these series for me. And I hope that they can add a level of enjoyment to you as well, if you like that sort of thing. Definitely, if you guys want to hear more about that, please leave a comment, because I would love to hear more about that. But regardless, we're always having fun here at the GSMC Pets Podcast. So I'd like to thank you all today for listening to the GSMC Pets Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. If you like what you heard today, please leave a comment below. Also consider subscribing to us. It helps us out a lot. Also, if you'd like to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, that would be a huge help. And until then, I hope you have a great day. See you next time.
You've been listening to the GSMC Pets Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's podcast.